Hi, welcome to Digging for Truth, where we explore the historical reliability of the 66 of the books of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. I'm your host, Henry Smith. Today, our guest is Dr. Todd Bolen, who's the founder of BiblePlaces.com, professor of biblical studies at the Masters University in California. Now, Dr. Bolen's joining us again today to talk more about the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem. This is part two of a two-part episode. Todd, welcome back to the show, Digging for Truth. Appreciate you being here again.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
All right. Well, you've been doing an excellent job sort of guiding us in part one through the sort of, the precursor to the destruction of Jerusalem, is sort of setting the stage, the preface. Very important events, and you did a great job of explaining that. Maybe give the audience just a quick summary of our discussion of part one.
Sure. Yeah. One of the big ideas there is that archaeologists love destruction because of the preservation. And you can go a long time, in a century or more, and there's no destruction. Then when archaeologists come to dig up a few thousand years later, they don't find anything. But in the case of Nebuchadnezzar's invasion now in the early 6th century, so we have a lot of this destruction. We talked about how he conquered many cities. This is recorded in the Bible, but the archaeologists confirmed that by finding remains of his invasion, ash layers at Gezer and at Bet Shemesh and at En-Gedi and at Arad. And we really zeroed in on Lachish. Not only is there a dramatic destruction layer there, it's level 2, 100 years after the Assyrian attack, but those potsherds, we talked about the inscriptions, the Lachish letters, that record those final days, including Lachish letter number 4, which says we're looking for the signal fires of Lachish. We could no longer see the signal fires of Azeg, and the beautiful parallel there with Jeremiah 34.
Excellent. Excellent. That is a great summary. And again, we want to encourage folks to go back and watch that episode. All right. So here it is. We're on the cusp of disaster here. They siege about 18 months or so, but I won't make any more comments. I'll let you sort of develop that as we're headed towards the final events.
Yeah, so these final months of Jerusalem's existence before, the conquest, and Jeremiah's going to talk about the 70 years of exile, that is somewhat shrouded in mystery because the Babylonian Chronicle doesn't exist. So I talked in the previous episode about how that it breaks off in 594. So Egyptian sources aren't very helpful either, but we're looking at the record in Kings. We're looking at the account in Jeremiah, some as well in Ezekiel, to piece together, try to understand what's going on. Like you said, it's about 18-month siege. And I almost want to preface, almost everything I say here has been debated or disputed in the last 100 years, whatever, including the length of that siege, including when it ended. This is just going on for many decades. Was it 587 or 586 or and there's good arguments on both sides. And in recent study, I've just kind of tip the scale myself to being 586, but it doesn't really matter. What is clear, what nobody disputes, is just how devastating it was. And I should also mention another record for the destruction of Jerusalem is the book of Lamentations. So not a favorite book maybe in our churches. These 5 chapters describing just how devastating. I think Jeremiah is the author of this book, and how the Lord had seemingly abandoned the city, and there's weeping going on. It's just horrible scenario. Because let me just, if I can just read a few verses from 2 Kings 25. Here's the fall. Here's how, and we want to develop out the archaeology of this description here, 2 Kings 25, verses 8 through 10. On the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, an official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. And so it's going to continue on and talk about just the sad fate of the king, Zedekiah, when his sons were killed before him and his eyes were gouged out. He's carried off to Babylon. There is hope in that chapter. I don't want to deny that. That's maybe outside the scope of what we're talking about now with the destruction. But this is just a devastating day, really month, actually. This Babylonians are wreaking havoc on this. Probably, too, like we talk about some of the remains here, like the ash layer. Why were the Babylonians so irate? I mean, why did they burn down, it says, all the houses of Jerusalem? I think they just had it. I mean, they were fed up. I mean, Zedekiah had toyed with them long enough. He forced them into a long siege, in 18 months, because Jerusalem was so well fortified. And when they broke through, a little bit like the Romans later on, in the year 70 AD, there was no restraint. And of course, that fortunate for the archaeologists, because so much was preserved because of that destruction.
Yeah, it's sort of they were sort of storing up their wrath towards the people of Israel, towards Jerusalem, in the sad way, of course, and is sort of unleashed on them. But to shift to the archaeological question, reading in that text, boy, there's a lot of clues there an archaeologist would be looking for. We'll talk about it in the next segment. Maybe you could point that out to the audience, like when you're thinking like an archaeologist or someone looking for evidence. What do you see there that you want to look for? Maybe point that out for someone who's new to archaeology. Maybe we have a guest watching for the first time.
Sure. I mean, fire, conflagration, ashes, destruction, and looking for evidence of that in the wooden beams that are going to be burned, and as well as evidence of the fighting, the conflict. The siege is going on. Presumably, there's going to be attacks and arrows that are shot, and there's going to be defenders on the walls. And yeah, so the archaeologist and the biblical historian, they're just looking for little details in the text that can clue us in to the big picture and what we might find preserved in the archaeological record.
Yeah, that's great, and that's exactly what we'll be looking for in our next segment. And we see, the temple of the Lord being destroyed, buildings being destroyed, and so on. And we've got a ton of evidence from this time period that substantiates that. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We're here with Dr. Todd Bolen. We're talking about the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, and we'll be right back.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Hi, I'm Henry Smith. I'm here with Dr. Todd Bolen, and welcome back to Digging for Truth. We're glad that you've joined us today. We are talking about a sad event in the history of biblical revelation, the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, who God specifically sends to bring judgment upon his own people in around 586 BC. All right, Todd, so now as sad as the event is from an archaeological standpoint, a destruction by a military force is an archaeologist's dream. And we really do have an inordinate amount of evidence. So I'm going to let you just open it up here. We're only going to hit the tip of the iceberg, but we'll do our best here in this segment. Go ahead, please.
Yes, so you're right. I mean, the amount of evidence, and more, I mean, in recent years, I mean, just last year, like every year almost, there's another discovery about something related to the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem. So I want to point our viewers to that and have some pictures here that are going to help to illuminate that. But maybe before I dive in, just one other thought. So because the viewer could be thinking like, we have so much archaeological evidence from this time period. In fact, there's an archaeological commentary written by Philip King some years ago on Jeremiah, and another book that came out just a few years ago. That's another archaeological commentary on Jeremiah by Rabbi Yehuda Landy. And like, how can these scholars do that? And yet, and maybe you hear this, David, like, why don't we have an archaeological commentary for the time of David? And here's the short answer: destruction. David conquered, he wasn't conquered. And so the remains weren't preserved. His just era went into the time of Solomon, and that went into the time of Rehoboam. So where you have this profusion is right now in these final days, King Zedekiah. So what do we have? So different excavations working in the city have found remains in different places. Maybe the main one that's visible to tourists today, and our viewers have been to the city of David and the famous Area G, and this is that area on the slope just below what we believe is the Palace of David that Yigal Shiloh excavated 1978 to 1985, and he found a lot of neat things from the Iron Age, especially from the end of the Iron Age in our time here of the destruction. So in Area G, they found a room that's just full of ash, that apparently wooden roof beams that had been burned. In fact, they dubbed the room, they called it the burnt chamber, and arrowheads in there too. So just this large quantity of ashes, and they dated it to the time of 586 and the Babylonian destruction. And right next to that, still in Area G, they found another building with 51 seal impressions. Okay, so in the ancient times, if you were writing a document, you would seal it, take a wet lump of clay, impress your seal into it. So this room, now they call this today the House of Boule, the House of the Seal Impressions, but it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't a house of seal impressions. Nobody collected seal impressions. What did they collect? They collected documents. This was an archive. Now, when the fire came through and the Babylonians burned this down, all of the perishable materials, all of those pyri, were burned up. But those the lumps of clay that, of course, hardened by that time, when the fire preserves them. And so in these inscriptions, we have lots of names. If you want to know, like, what are the names of people in those days, you just look through that. It's really a rich collection, including 2 people mentioned. We have their names in the biblical account. One of whom is in the book of Jeremiah, Gemariah, the son of Shaphan. And so we know one of the contemporaries of Jeremiah living in the city, and we have his own seal impression right there in the House of Boule in Area G. And right next to that, still staying in Area G, they found a toilet. Okay, it's part of a house. No, they don't find a lot of toilets in the ancient world. It seems to be this is for the wealthy people. Say like, well, what does that tell us? Well, the archaeologists, they did what you expect, and they dug underneath it, and they discovered a cesspit 6 feet deep, and they analyzed it, and they were able to determine that the diet of the household included salad plants, pot herbs, spices, not much wheat and barley. That's a reflection of famine conditions. But also this, they found an unusually large number of eggs from 2 different kinds of human intestinal parasites. They found tapeworm and also whipworm. And that's evidence of extremely poor sanitary conditions that reflects the final days of a siege, when they just didn't have food. I mean, again, 18 months that they were under siege from Babylon. So that's dramatic finds. Those are a little bit older. Let me tell you about some new ones. So in recent years, they've been working in the city of David, still on the eastern slope, down below the area of Warren Shaft and kind of near south of the Gihon Spring. And they found houses that were destroyed by the Babylonians. They found in them ashes. They found the collapsed building. They're able to date this. They say, like, how do you know? Because maybe it was destroyed some other time, whatever. But among the things that allowed them to date this to the Babylonian destruction were jar handles that had rosette stamps on them. They also found an ivory statue of a naked woman in Egyptian style that's from that time period, and destruction layer. Now, the destruction layer was uneven. Sometimes it was really thick, like 3 feet. Sometimes it was not much, which may indicate that not all the buildings were destroyed or not evenly or whatever. But clearly evidence of this destruction. And then here's one other recent project. They're working on Mount Zion. So this is the modern name of the Western Hill. Shimon Gibson and his team been doing a lot of great work there over the years. And recently they announced the discovery of the Babylonian destruction. They found their ash deposits. They found there as well Scythian arrowheads from this time period, late 7th, early 6th century, that are of the type that the Babylonians would have used. And they found as well a lady's earring or some kind of jewelry that's hard to know exactly for sure what it is. But yeah, it reflects, I mean, you had this beautiful city, prosperous city, but rebelling against God, and God turned them over to the rod of his anger, as it were, the Babylonians, and the Nebuchadnezzar marched on the city and destroyed it.
Well, that was excellent. I would call that a tour de force of evidence. And of course, those pictures that we showed up on the screen are going to really illuminate that. We've come down to our final segment here is coming up. Todd, thank you for that. And we're going to continue talking about the archaeological evidence because there's even more to discuss. And with that word, we'll be right back.
Bible and Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible and Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV, positively different television.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Dr. Todd Bolen. We're talking about the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem. In our last segment, we did literally a tour de force of evidence related to the destruction, but we have even more to talk about in this segment. Now, Todd, people are going to naturally ask the question about Solomon's temple, so maybe you could briefly address that and then just continue building the case here, as it were.
Yeah, so what happened to Solomon's temple? The book of Kings says that it was destroyed. Where's the archaeological evidence for that? We don't have it. And there's a good reason why, because of later building. So later there was a second temple, and then Herod rebuilt that temple, and the Romans came along and destroyed that. And then today, the Muslims control it. It's a holy area for them, the Haram al-Sharif, and so they do not permit excavation of that. So what would we find if we could dig there? I'm not sure there would be that much. I think the Babylonians really thoroughly destroyed it, but there's still a lot more that we do know about, including, so this is another one of those recent discoveries. Now, they've been working in the area of what is locally known as the Givati parking lot. I know that doesn't sound very attractive as a name for an excavation, but it was a parking lot. And I remember, we'd walk through that with our students or whatever, and then they started a small hole and then a bigger hole, and now it's this massive hole where they've just been digging down and down. And what they've found from this time, they found evidence of Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in a public building, or maybe public or maybe an elite building, some kind, a wealthy person lived here or something, and huge, 55 feet by 33 feet in size. They found up to nearly 8 feet of debris. So ash, charcoal, dirt, stones. In this, they found the flooring, and it's a very high quality floor, 6-inch thick, polished. And in the floor, this is one thing about archaeology these days, it's not just one guy or lady with knowledge, but it's a whole team of experts. And so they analyzed the floor tiles and discovered minerals embedded in the floor that were heated to more than 900 degrees Fahrenheit. And this magnetized them And so then scholars are studying the magnetic fields on the Earth in this in 586 from this, and adding to our field of knowledge. Just last year, they found another portion of the city wall. So this is in the first part, but it's another section of the city wall surrounding Jerusalem that the Babylonians destroyed. And this was sizable, quite significant, 15 feet thick, on the eastern slope of the city of David. Now, why is it preserved so much? This could be another point of question, or like, well, how could it be preserved so much of the Babylonians or destruction, whatever, destroying? The theory is that what the archaeologists suggested is because it's on a very steep section of the slope, that it would have been very hard to access. And so the army didn't even bother to go there and knock it down. And that's to the benefit of us and the archaeologists who uncovered it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, from a military tactical standpoint, they didn't need to knock down every brick of every part of the wall around the city. Obviously, they would have chosen the path of least resistance and done what they needed to. It's interesting, just a quick comment on the variation in the field for archaeology. We don't just dig and analyze the archaeological data. Going back to the toilet information, they had to study the remains from the toilet. They were able to determine things. The minerals that you mentioned. So it's a multifaceted, multidisciplinary field. Archaeology is really fascinating. Okay, so but we got to shift here because you want to talk about the breaking through of the middle, related to the middle gate in the book of Jeremiah. Let's talk about anything related to that, please, Todd.
Sure. So that's really another dramatic discovery related to the destruction. So I mean, we've just been talking about this and that and this and that and all these different things. But what we have here on the Western Hill, the archaeologists excavating under Nachman Avigadad in the 1970s, they discovered this massive structure, 30 feet square, preserved. You'll believe this, 25 feet high, and it's still today. I mean, you can go to it in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, it's usually locked. They don't have a caretaker there, but some days, and you have to go down several flights of stairs, and you're looking up at this huge tower. In fact, that's what they called it, the Israelite Tower. But this tower is actually part of a gate, and that makes sense to identify, and this is what they propose, to identify it with the middle gate because it's on the northern wall, guess where? In the middle of the line. And this is mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, where it says all the officials of the king of Babylon came and took seats in the middle gate. So here we have another building. I don't have too many of these, but a building mentioned in the Bible. We discovered it archaeologically. Next to it, they found not only a massive layer of ash, again, from the burning of the Babylonians, but I also found some of the arrowheads from the Babylonian army, the soldiers that had, been shooting in the midst of the siege. And we can even say, too, that in that passage there in Jeremiah 39, also in 2 Kings 25, two of the officials that are named there in the Bible, we have their names mentioned in Babylonian records, again, revealing the eyewitness testimony of the biblical account.
Phenomenal. All right, believe it or not, Todd, we've come down to the end, and really, we've only touched the tip of the iceberg in these two episodes. You've done a wonderful job of explaining it. I'm going to give you about a minute to sort of sum it up. Again, that's a tough task, but I'm confident in the fact that you can do it for the audience. Please do so.
Yeah, so we have this proliferation of archaeological evidence in Jerusalem and throughout Judah at this time, and that goes along with really a profusion of prophetic texts. And so, as I had mentioned before, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and why? This is a dramatic moment in the history of Israel. You might think that all is lost. I mean, you might think like the temple's burned, like it's never coming back. I mean, Jerusalem's been destroyed. It's never going to be rebuilt. What do these prophets say? What does Jeremiah say, for instance, right? There will be a new covenant. God will restore Jerusalem. What does Ezekiel say, right? The temple that was destroyed, right? There's going to be a new temple where God is dwelling in the midst of his people. And as crazy as it might have sounded in those days, you might have thought like, oh, these prophets are crazy. No, right? The Lord's word is true. God keeps his promises. And so even in the midst of destruction, we have a testimony of God's faithfulness and his promises to accomplish his purposes for his glory to fill the earth.
Amen to that. Well, thank you, Todd, for joining us for these episodes. Fantastic job. We so appreciate your ministry. And friends, thank you for joining us for this episode of Digging for Truth.